Good morning or good evening, as the case may be. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are watching a few weeks ago, you will have seen me design a layout looking about like this. And when I sent this final plan off to the customer and got a confirmation that he liked it, I really thought the project was done, as indeed it was for a few weeks. But then shortly thereafter, the customer lost the use of the intended room and he ended up with a different shaped space. Let's have a look at the new room. Here is the new site. It's an L-shaped space. Not all of the area around here is available, and there's a few obstructions, including his L-shaped desk that he wants to leave in the corner in front of the windows. And if I superimpose the previous layout plan on top of this, we can see that although its extremities are both longer and wider than the main area of this room, it's about the same overall size, just a different shape. So clearly this layout is not going to fit. He wanted some of the same elements. He wanted to keep the passenger terminal front and center, although make it a double-ended one, and keep the engine facilities, and then get more scenic area and go back to a double-deck plan as we had before. So here is the first general arrangement sketch that I drew. He's allocated an area about 2 meters square in the corner of the addition for the helix. On the upper deck, the double track main line ran around the edge, leaving the biggest area for the passenger terminal and engine facilities. And then the lower deck, we're thinking of a twice round single track loop, most likely with staging in this area here, with just one visible track in front of it. Although at this stage I'm not quite sure how to make that accessible. I went on to refine it a little bit, adding an industrial branch around this end of the room into this otherwise unused area here. And then he talked about moving the desk into the annex, just in case this space was more usable. And then we decided that if he was going to clear out the rest of this area to put his desk here, we'd be better off with leaving it where it was and just expanding the layout into this area. So this is what I did with this plan. Here's the upper deck, showing how the layout can be improved if we've got the whole of this annex here. We've now got room to move the helix into the bottom corner, enlarge the radius of it slightly to reduce the grade, and we've got room to put staging yards above and below it, your return loop type staging yards, and then loop the main line around the outside to increase the running distance. It also means that as you come in, you have a scenic area directly visible instead of just entering through what would effectively be a back room. And then the lower deck, we've still got the twice round with staging under the helix. I haven't deleted this staging yard yet. At this stage I wasn't sure if this was going to be enough staging here or not, so that's why I left in the possibility of putting another one here. I did at first have a little bit of trouble getting this main line to miss the branch line, so the branch would have to go over the top of it, and then I rearranged it so that they don't have to cross each other, leaving us a lot more flexibility in terms of the levels and grades. And I started fleshing out the critical areas just to make sure everything would fit, and then I wondered if it was beneficial to try to get rid of this flyover. The reason for wrapping this main line around here was to avoid having to dive under the line to the high level staging, because I wasn't sure if the grade would be sufficient. But then when I drew it out, I found there's just about enough room to get 4 inches of clearance here with a 2% up and down grade without compromising the vertical curves necessary here. Of course, now with the main line wrapping this way around the annex, instead of crossing over itself, the helix access has to be in the other direction. I experimented with 2 different locations, one here and one there. Putting it here, although the junction would have been slightly more accessible, the need for a straight crossing here would have made the construction of the top lap of the helix a little awkward. So I eventually selected this location here at the back. Here it is drawn in with 9 staging loops. I aimed for 9 because that's what we had on the previous layout, 9 staging tracks on each level, the difference here being a little bit longer. The inner 2 tracks are substandard radius, so they are good for diesel hauled freights. The other 7 tracks will be available for anything he wants to use them for. So moving to the lower level now, here we see the twice round single track main line. The staging area in this corner has now been deleted because there's going to be plenty of staging on the rest of the layout. This long track around here and around through these 4 loops here, joining up again here, is the lower level continuous run. Without that, it becomes a true point-to-point layout, going from top staging to bottom staging, wrapping around all the trackage on both decks. It's necessary to divide the 2 scenes here with a double-sided backdrop down the middle. That is necessary for structural reasons. The double-deck swing gate being built as an I-beam, the backdrop being structural. And in many cases around here and this end, the lower level backdrop is what supports the upper deck benchwork. So at this point, the customer and I both thought we were getting somewhere, and I started fleshing in the details. Here is the top deck with all the track drawn in. I've enhanced the industrial suburb slightly and found an area where he can add another set of industries here, and there's just about enough clearance for some of the spurs to enter the buildings and go through the backdrop underneath the staging yard here, adding about an extra 3 feet more capacity per track. The engine terminal is pretty much the same as the one on the other layout, although the lead tracks are now slightly longer and the diesel house has been slightly relocated. In front of the passenger terminal there is a small local freight yard. At this point he also mentioned that he had a rollabout tool chest that he wanted to incorporate in the room, so I drew it to scale. Here it is. I found that there was a good location for it under the benchwork here, because this section of the benchwork is only going to be single deck. There's not going to be any lower deck benchwork below it. I wanted to leave clearance for a nice river valley here to use up his big truss bridge, and that will still clear the tool chest, but it wouldn't have given enough clearance for a lower scenic level. So all I had to do now was to start filling in the scenic details. Here's the lower deck in all its glory. Unlike the last layout, I was able to use up all his bridge kits. There's also a couple of locations here and here where he can have really deep canyons with the scenery to the floor. This one needs to be somewhat shallower because he needs to be able to roll under the benchwork here on his creeper to get to the access hatch. I made a few changes when I drew the track in detail. I improved the mine area here. I added a couple of extra spurs at this town here. Originally this was just going to be a passing track so that the mine train can run around its cars and switch the mine, but there was room to make it an additional small town. And as with the upper deck, I've shown a location where one of the industrial spurs can head into a building through the backdrop. Gives a decent length tail track for a second small mine. Although the helix is still double tracked, the turnout to go from double to single has now been taken beyond the backdrop into the hidden area, because 2 turnouts here made this area just a little bit cramped. So the only visible junction here is between the helix and the continuous run. And I found room for a 5th loop around here. There was only 4 on the first plan. This one now has 5. So that's 1 extra train that can be staged. The whole layout now has a total of 23 staging tracks, 2 9-track yards and a 5-track yard. Although that is sufficient for the trains that the customer currently has, more than likely he will overflow it eventually. But there just wasn't enough space to add anything else. The headroom is barely sufficient to walk, so I wasn't able to extend the helix upwards and have a sky staging yard as I would have liked to have done. Let's go to the upper deck now. Here is the upper deck finish. The necessary access at the back here is shown covered over with city buildings because that's the way he wants to do it. I found a place here for a really neat trick. We have this road intersection here with a mirror diagonally across the intersection, so it actually looks as though both those routes continue onwards beyond the backdrop. There are numerous road bridges over the main line dividing up into sections, causing the train to disappear from view momentarily in a few places, thus making the routes appear longer. In the industrial area, I managed to find space to get 4 through tracks through the middle. 4 is a good number. It means that one of the middle tracks can be used for stashing the incoming train. The other middle track can be used for building up the outgoing train, while still leaving both outside tracks free for run-round manoeuvres and access to all the industrial spurs. And then, since this is a fairly high elevation, I put buildings down the middle to act as a view block. And it can also disguise just how close together the 2 sets of tracks are. As long as the visible ends of the structures are a believable width, your eye will tell you that they're just as wide the whole length, so you'll never see just how narrow it is at this point here. The passenger terminal is 4 tracks wide. The front pair of tracks are long enough for his 14-foot Empire builder. The back 2 are only about 10 feet, which is long enough for most of his trains. We've still got the 4 express docks and 1 track serving the post office. Although you can only see about 2 feet of it, it does go 2 more feet beyond. So you get 4 full-length mail cars in there. Well, I think that just about sums up this layout. Most of the design goals were discussed in the previous video, although many of the elements in this one are more spread out. Also, by this stage, I had redrawn the approaches to the staging yards. It's a little bit more streamlined in this area. Although some of the tracks are a little bit shorter, they're still plenty long enough. And it means that this access opening here is a lot wider than it would otherwise have been. We also looked at the possibility of adding a few short spurs in here for spare locomotives. Let me see if I can find that drawing. Here it is. A series of number 7 turnouts will allow for 4 spurs. The customer's thinking of omitting those, at least for the time being. He's probably going to build the benchwork wide enough to put them in later if he changes his mind. So let me go back to the other view now. Now, because of the complexity of the grades and levels, I needed to do a lot of additional drawings to give the customer some idea of how to build the complicated areas and also how to support the upper deck. So I'm thinking of splitting that out and doing a separate video on that next week. And also I'll talk about some of the special access requirements at the same time. I think that will be very informative. So I will leave you with this for the time being, and I will see you again next week. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.